Hello Underdogger, it's your boy Underdog Recapped. Before we start, warning, spoilers ahead. Today, we are going to recap a French action and drama movie released in 2020, called Rogue City. The movie is about the anti-organized crime unit of the French police who are involved in a rivalry between two gangs. Slowly, secrets of police involvement in the gangs are revealed. What would the team eventually figure out? Let's find out together, in a doggy-styled recap. The film opens with a woman screaming at a beach house and is followed by the appearance of a man wielding a shotgun. After shooting a dog, he kneels in the front yard and shoots himself. 3 weeks before that, in a high-security prison, an organized criminal chief named Paul Maranzano is being transferred under the strict guard of 4 police officers. There are 4 anti-organized crime police officers, with Richard Vronsky as the head of the team. Along the way, Paul is seen chatting with Richard before asking Richard for leniency to visit his wife, who is dying of cancer in the hospital. Despite being advised by his colleagues not to allow it, Richard agrees. Arriving at the hospital, it turns out that Paul's wife wants to die because she feels that Paul could no longer accompany her in her dying state. Richard had not allowed Paul to be alone, but compassion overcomes his logic. He lets Paul spend a private moment with his wife while he waits in the hospital corridor. Not long after, Paul comes out with a sad face, and the transfer process continues without a hitch. After finishing their duties, Richard and the company return to the base to clean up. Another policeman named Costa of the armed robbery unit comes and informs them that there would be an inauguration of a new police chief. The next day, the new chief's inauguration takes place. Richard and his 3 colleagues are present, including their immediate supervisor. On the other hand, Joseph Bastiani is stalking someone at a bar. Joseph himself was just an underling of Paul whom Richard escorted earlier, but now he runs his own gang. Not long after, the 4 members of the opposing gang they're spying on appear and enter the bar. All 4 are subordinates of a criminal named Franck Nadal. Seeing the target has gathered, Joseph and his crew immediately get out of the car and try to ambush. Chaos ensues and a gunfight breaks out with many casualties. However, Franck managed to save himself. Instead, one of Joseph's friends is shot in the chest. Luckily, he was wearing a bulletproof vest, which he immediately throws away with a rifle into the trash can at the crime scene. It wasn't long before the police team arrives, so does Richard. He tries to interrogate Joseph's friend who is the only surviving witness, but Costa stops him. He warned Richard that this was outside his team's jurisdiction and is now under Costa's investigation as an armed robbery case. Costa drags Joseph's friend into the interrogation room. They seem to know each other. It turns out that Costa is one of the rats of Joseph's gang in the police force. The man threatens to expose Costa's corruption if he's not immediately released. This makes Costa upset and immediately kills him. Costa makes it seem like the guy was trying to attack him and that he was just defending himself. Costa then returns home, where he is ambushed by Franck and his gang who had taken his wife and child hostage. Apparently, Costa also works for Franck's gang, and Franck forces him to admit that he informed Joseph's gang of their meeting in the bar. That's why the shootout happened. To save himself and his family, Costa instead informs Franck about the large-scale drug transaction that Joseph's gang is planning to carry out. Meanwhile, at the police station, Richard's supervisor is discussing the shooting incident between the 2 rival gangs with another senior officer. She suspects that Costa leaked some information to one gang, but the supervisor is hesitant as Costa is a senior officer in his class. The supervisor then leads a briefing regarding the incident. The meeting ends, but another tension arises when one of Richard's teammates, Will, taunts Costa for killing Joseph's friend. This sets a bad precedent in the media and suspicion from the Central Police, so the other senior officer was sent to help with the investigation. That evening at his houseboat, Richard receives a call from the forensics officer who autopsies Joseph's friend. They suspect that he was wearing a bulletproof vest during the shootout due to the bruises on his chest. Thus, the next morning, Richard searches the crime scene alone. He finds the bulletproof vest and rifle that Joseph's friend had hidden. Richard returns to his houseboat to relax with his co-workers and their partners. Their conversation was interrupted by an incoming call, where Richard received confirmation from forensics about the owner of another fingerprint on the rifle that Joseph's friend used. The following day, Richard and his team visit the cathedral where the funeral mass for Joseph's friend is taking place, with the majority in attendance being members of Joseph's gang. In the middle of the service, Richard arrests one of them, causing tension between his team and the congregation. A member of the gang who is Joseph's sibling, warns Richard of his actions, but he and his team brush it off. The man Richard and his team caught is just a gun maker for Joseph's gang. He says that it's Paul's son who bought the gun which was used in the shootout. Hearing this confession, Richard and his team waste no time in arresting Paul's son in his apartment, who fights back at them before jumping out of the attic naked. Richard and his team spread out to trap him, and after an intense chase, he is cornered. Paul's son, who keeps trying to fight back, was shot dead by one of Richard's crew. After failing to catch Paul's son alive, Richard again holds a follow-up meeting at the police station. They have now succeeded in associating more names in the shootout incident. After the meeting is done, Richard and the other cops spend time in a bar, where Will is seducing Manon Leonetti, the chief's daughter. Meanwhile, Richard is chatting with the senior officer outside the bar, who is still suspicious about a mole within the police and alleges that Richard might be the mole. However, Richard doesn't seem to care. Nearby, Joseph, who is lurking in front of the bar, decides to follow Manon and Will, who come out together. When the two stop at a deserted street to make out, Joseph fires several shots before fleeing. Luckily, both of them survive. Richard immediately heads to the scene of the shooting. When the medics are about to take a sample, Richard tells the medical officer to take Will's blood instead, as he is worried that Will would be fired if found driving under the influence. Meanwhile, Costa reports Richard's trick to the chief. This results in a 6-month suspension for Richard, and Will also admits to his actions and is temporarily laid off. Richard tells his supervisor that Joseph had sent 2 men to threaten his wife, and the supervisor advises him not to get involved in this case again. On the day of Paul's son's funeral, Richard comes to Paul to say condolences for the death of his son. Paul then informs Richard that soon, Joseph's gang will carry out a large-scale drug transaction. Hearing this, Richard makes a plan with his teammates to arrest Paul's gang members when the transaction is happening. The idea is to restore their good name and the Four's reputation in the police force. On the other hand, Costa provides detailed information about when the drug transaction would take place. Afterward, Costa calls the chief and informs him that his instructions have been carried out. As it turns out, the police chief is an important insider of Joseph's gang in the French police force. He is the one who has been protecting every drug operation run by Joseph's gang from behind the scenes. Richard and his 3 colleagues gather again that afternoon. They agree to arrest Joseph's gang according to the plan despite operating without legality. Everyone is excited except for Will, who appears in an unstable condition. In the evening, Joseph's gang gathers at a rendezvous point on a remote coast, including Frank's gang, who is lurking in the dark, and the 4 policemen who follow them in an inflatable boat, unaware of the chaos that is about to ensue. Seeing the arrival of Joseph's men with large bags on the coast, Richard's team ambush first. A gunfight is inevitable and Joseph's men are pushed back. Unfortunately, one of Richard's teammates was hit by a bullet on the side of his neck. Meanwhile, Frank chooses to run away after seeing the unfavorable circumstances. Richard and his team manage to get away with the bags containing the money that was going to be used in the transaction. They destroy the boat used to eliminate evidence, then go to the medical officer's place to ask for help for their shot teammate. She agrees to help Richard's teammate, and he thanks her before taking a large bag full of money and leaving it with his houseboat neighbor. On the other hand, the shootout on the coast again invites some chaos. Richard's supervisor summons him to the scene while his members are searching for shreds of evidence. The supervisor says that Richard has been reactivated for duty, and the chief has everyone deployed. Not long after, an SUV arrives and from the inside came another senior officer from the undercover and detective unit. Meanwhile, Manon sees Costa picking up a watch that is Richard's from a pile of sand. In the locker room, Costa confronts Richard about the discovery of his watch and asks for part of the money that Richard has hidden. Richard threatens to reveal everything to the chief, but Costa taunts him, telling Richard that the chief is involved in all this. Both of them are not aware that their conversation is being overheard by Manon. The chief and senior officers from the undercover unit gather everyone in the meeting room. The chief reveals to everyone that several undercover detectives in the operation to arrest Joseph's gang were also killed last night, all of whom worked under the undercover unit. This disclosure indirectly makes Richard and his team be in a difficult position. After returning from the meeting, Richard visits his teammate at the medical officer's home, unaware that Joseph's gang and a senior officer are stalking him. After a brief conversation with his teammate, Richard receives a call from a forensics officer who informs him that ballistic analysis of the crime scene indicates that the bullet that killed the detectives last night was from his fired teammate's rifle. Richard immediately leaves after passing this information to Will, who is drunk at a bar. Meanwhile, the senior officer, who is watching in her car, sees the 2 of Joseph's men sneak into the medical officer's residence. She decided to follow, and a shootout between her and Richard's injured teammate against the 2 gang members is inevitable. Both intruders are successfully neutralized, although the senior herself is knocked down by a bullet in her stomach. While at his house, Will is enraged and loses control before deciding to reach for the shotgun he had stored away. The scene then proceeds to the tragedy at the beginning of the film. Richard was summoned to his office and received interrogation from his supervisor and the head of the undercover unit, who seemed to have suspected the involvement of Richard and his colleagues in yesterday's incident. In the middle of questioning, the supervisor gets a call that Frank has killed Costa and his family. At the crime scene, Richard admits his actions to his supervisor and says he doesn't want to make things difficult for his boss. He plans to crush Frank and his gang by luring them with the transaction money that Richard has secured. Outside, Manon waits for Richard and returns his watch, as well as Joseph's gang's transaction logs that Costa had kept that involve her father, the chief. Using his findings, Richard goes to Joseph's house and speaks with Joseph's sibling from the funeral. He intends to exchange the evidence in his possession for evidence of the chief's involvement in a criminal organization and to arrest Frank. The gang agrees with the idea. As planned, Richard calls Frank and says he wants to meet. The supervisor accompanies Richard with a shotgun in the passenger seat, but Frank didn't come alone. Richard then asked Frank to join his car, and not long after, Richard's teammates who have been stalking from the hills finish off Frank and his colleagues using sniper rifles. Richard then goes to the chief's residence and presents the evidence of his involvement, which immediately shocks the chief. The next day, the chief immediately clears Richard and his team of all accusations before the press. This invites the wrath of the undercover unit's leader, who knows that all of this is a lie. The film closes with the departure of Richard and his wife on a cruise. It was later seen that everyone involved in the case are systematically killed. Richard himself is murdered on his boat, and it is revealed that all of these murders are the work of the undercover unit's leader. Corruption within law enforcement is unfortunately more common than we'd like. The actions of people like Costa or the chief who works with crime syndicates could jeopardize regular citizens. Do you think that corrupt cops should be punished? Let us know what you think in the comment below. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you in our next recap.